Hey there, guys. It's John Rose. Forgive my tone of voice. I contracted the illness I was trying to help my father overcome this past weekend. And it's been a real doozy. I haven't gotten much work done this week, been mostly in and out of consciousness. So I'll appreciate prayers on that front. But I really wanted to discuss this issue because many people who follow me on X seem perplexed by my interest in the province of Alberta, Canada, right now, considering I live in the deep south of the United States. They don't understand what affinity I might have with the province of Alberta, what sympathies I might have with the political issues currently going on in Canada. And so I want to explain all that before the track goes cold, which it may very well for a few months or a few years very soon, depending on how Ottawa chooses to handle this going forward. But anyways, to catch you up, guys, real quick, the premier, kind of the leader of the province of Alberta, is Danielle Smith. And she, for the past few years, has been trying to find new ways to obtain leverage and negotiate with the federal government in Canada to get a fairer deal for her constituents. And if you are a conservative in Alberta, this is the logical decision because a lot of federal policy explicitly restricts the energy sector of Alberta, and through that, their capacity to grow, their capacity to prosper, their general capacity to be anything. And so honestly, they get a very bad deal from the past 10 years of liberal government, and they just saw a fourth election of a liberal government, and they're just very deeply frustrated. Now, Danielle Smith released an 18-minute video where she explicitly states, as a member of the Canadian government, leader of a province, she doesn't support the secession of Alberta, but she uses a beautiful phrase that is lost on many of my, peers here in the United States. It's a beautiful phrase. You should think about it and you should reflect on it. Danielle Smith promotes a sovereign Alberta in a united Canada. Many people look at this phrase with confusion. They think it's hogwash. They think it's, political talk. They don't understand the meaning behind that phrase because for 150 years, the United States has not been a true federal system. But when we signed the Constitution, the first and second, and even most of the third generation of American citizens all believed in federalism. And that really was the concept that many went with. They didn't want the federal government determining so many aspects of individual people's lives, which has inevitably harmed and divided our country rather than making it closer. We have been divided by the federal government making choices on social issues rather than being united like we should be on economics, war, trade, etc. So Danielle Smith actually provides a clear image of what we believed. And of course, Danielle Smith resides in more of a confederal system than a federal system, but there's really no point in making a distinction right now because obviously the Ottawa government, the federal government of Canada, desperately wants to try and push for centralization. And they have, and they've been very successful. So it comes out, she makes this 18-minute video. She refuses to demonize any of her constituents. She said there's many deeply frustrated Albertans who love this country, who love their families, and who love Alberta. And they see no resolution with the Ottawa government and believe it's time to secede. And she said, these people are patriots. Do not disparage them. Understand that even if I and you, even if we disagree with the secessionists on how to handle this issue, they love where they live and their families just as much as you do. And I would argue to say they probably love their families more than you do. But going through, she made it really explicit. It's like, listen, I want leverage to negotiate with Ottawa. I'm going to go and take this to Carney. She's talked a big game, and she's been very eloquent with her speech. Now, that doesn't always equate to action. And many people, skeptics and cynicists alike, have basically said she's just a sweet talker, that she's not going to do anything with this, and that this is just to drive up her base. And I'm not saying that's not what's happening. I'm not saying anything's going to happen, but what I do think is that if something did happen here, it would be a wonderful thing for the province of Alberta. Right now, as it stands, there's this thing called the Alberta Prosperity Project, which is getting close to 150,000 signatures. The way this works is that if the Alberta Prosperity Project can get to the new lowered standard of 177,000 registers, so that's only like 29,000 more registers than they have right now. If they can get to that standard as soon as possible, they would be able to put up a question on a 2026 referendum for secession from Alberta. Now, does voting to secede from Alberta inherently imply the secession of excuse me. Does it imply that they will secede from Alberta? No. But what it does imply, if Danielle Smith has a referendum and she has a majority vote, it deeply enhances her capacity to get policies removed that harm her constituents. If she has an entire province crying out for freedom from the Ottawa government, then that obviously is going to force Ottawa to make concessions to them unless this explodes into a larger altercation. Now, is it actually feasible for secession to go through in Alberta? There are methods that they could take. It would force the United States to take a position on it. And as it stands right now in the current negotiating atmosphere, I don't see Donald Trump agreeing to assist the Alberta government with secession. Now, if the trade deal's finished and Mark Carney slips Trump a new one, does America wrong, or if he just keeps screwing over Alberta, I could see a situation a year from now in 2026 when they hold this referendum where Trump offers to allow military personnel from our country to defend Alberta's borders while they negotiate with the Ottawa government on a new relationship. And this is not unusual in the strain, our genetics of politics. Look, the United States and Canada all come from Great Britain. And I know there's infusions of French and German migrants, but our judicial system, our legal system, is British common law. In British common law, every few centuries or so, there is a discussion of some amount of decentralization. If you know history, you understand that. That's the entire point of the Magna Carta, was that the king, in spite of being sovereign, had to allow local rulers certain permissions. That was what the English Civil War was about, even though I don't necessarily agree with the English Civil War, how they handled it. And even right now, in the current system of the United Kingdom, there is a certain degree of decentralization in Scotland, although you never really hear much about it because it's kind of meaningless given the current ideology that consumes Scotland. It's pretty much useless. So we don't look at it kindly, because the people that have a amount of decentralization from England's government don't take advantage of it in the way that right-wing people would. But that's besides the point. I think if you've been listening to me talk about it all the way up to this point, you understand why Alberta having more autonomy in the Canadian federal government is deeply interesting to me. And it's in America's interests because if they have more autonomy, they have more lateral freedom to actually do business with the United States. Alberta would be even inside of Canada if it was a sovereign Alberta in a united Canada. They can do energy deals with us that help us maintain North American energy dominance and make sure that we are the prime exporters of liquid natural gas, um, and clean coal and many other products across the world. And obviously, one of the main concerns right now in the United States is we're trying to apply a corrective force to our market in relationship to the world market so that we export more and import less. Energy is a big part of that. Alberta can help with that. So I think that that would be a beautiful partnership that they could engage in if they were granted autonomy by the Ottawa government. If the Ottawa government continues to abuse them, as they have for essentially over a century, they were founded in about 1905, as you can see on this page. If the federal government continues to abuse them, well, it's funny because the issue of secession in Canada has a much more righteous legal basis than the United States does post-Civil War. Of course, we had all of these rights and more prior to losing the War of Northern Aggression, 1861 to 1865. But that political basis on its own should help you understand why I would have a political affinity with Alberta, not just because they are in the contemporary interest of America for us to have ties that Ottawa doesn't get to mess with, whether it's within Canada or outside of Canada, but it's also because they have access to a political function of British common law that has been extinguished by the Hamiltonian nightmare that most of the world is engulfed in nowadays. I think this is what a lot of people don't get. They see me support Trump. They see me defend Trump's tariff policy. They see me defend all of these things, and they do not understand where I come from. They deeply do not understand where I come from. For me, Trumpism is about gaining control of the Hamiltonian nightmare from globalists. Because if it's a nightmare, it will be far more pleasant if the United States is running it than anybody else. European dish rags smearing themselves upon all of our generosity, or Chinese, or Indians, or any coalition of people across the planet. The United States is going to handle the Hamiltonian nightmare better than anybody else. But I still consider it a nightmare. And I believe that if we allow it to grow and prosper back into what it used to be, that the natural solution, which will be federalism and decentralization, will appear for America again. And then we'll have probably a couple of constitutional crises over it. But inevitably, there are forces outside of the capacity of the federal government to resolve that inevitably will help us decentralize, at least on social issues. But when the healthcare stuff starts collapsing or the social services, then you may see some genuine monetary decentralization as well. Anyways, let me get more into like kind of the cultural aspect of it. Because as you can see right here, I pulled it up. I asked people earlier today what they thought when they saw this flag. This is the flag, the crest of Alberta. I think they have another flag that they use, but this is the traditional crest, and you can see a St. George flag on the top, a marker of English culture. You see the Rocky Mountains. You see the hilltops, the rolling hilltops. Those little green patches you see below the hilltops are the prairies, and then you see the wheat fields. And for kind of people that kind of meme about ethnic stuff, it literally does sound like English Agartha. And it's funny because when you look into the people who were settling in Alberta, it was small in number. But the primary customs and culture that dominated early Alberta tended to be British people, um, or people engaging in British assimilation. Um, so there were some, there was influxes of immigration from the United States into Alberta, because of course at that time in the 19th century the borders were a lot more gray, less defined. We hadn't populated these areas yet. So you have migration and even Mormons coming up into Alberta. You have British people, you have some French people, and you have a bunch of other different groups of people that come into Alberta. And a lot of people go, well, how on earth could this be British culture if you have all of these different ethnic groups in Alberta? And my answer to that is very strongly it's the same affinity that borderers had for one another. The borderers are a distinct group of English, Scots, Irish uh, immigrants to the United States that had a distinctive culture, and they defined a lot of the Wild West. They defined a lot of the Deep South. They defined a lot of of American culture. And it's a distinctly American affinity. They came over here for very similar reasons, with very similar customs, and in spite of having a very confused genetic ancestry, there was a solidarity that came from the circumstances that they had been put in over the centuries. The reason they're called borderers is because they hung out around borders that changed a lot. And so because the government changed a bunch, they had to create their own rules. So that is actually where I see the cross affinity. Is there's a lot of borderers. Of course, the people that ruled Southern society are dead. The planters are dead or intermixed with borderers in the South. And so we're primarily borderer culture down here. We're the extension of borderer culture to whatever degree it has been diminished by, the centralizing culture. I notice a lot of people who live in big cities like New York and Chicago who want to tell me how my family behaves, how my citizens behave, how the people in my local areas behave. And I just want to tell them, go, you know, stick it where the sun don't shine. I, for one, know for sure that we still do lead distinct lives from all of you that you wouldn't understand if I started trying to explain it to you. You would start, if I explained a lot of my childhood to some of you, you start looking at me like an alien. It's because it's a distinct culture. But part of the Canadian project was waspification, Britanization. So all of these disparate groups were being assimilated into a British Canadian culture. And this was to be seen as the thing that would unify Canada. And so if you want to look at it in that way, I guess you could even draw a parallel between like the ruling of Dacia by the Roman Empire. The people living in Dacia, the Dacians, or however you want to pronounce it, very clearly were not of the same ethnic descent as the Romans in the Italian boot were. But there was hard, concerted effort to make them believe they were Roman. And they believed they were Roman so hard, their modern day contemporary country is called Romania. They believe they are, in some sense, Roman people. And it's because of that cultural pressure to be Roman from a very long time ago. In the same way, there was an attempt to make all these disparate ethnos in Alberta all, kind of waspified. To what extent that worked, I mean, as far as creating a cohesive culture, I think it worked beautifully. And the reason it worked beautifully is because they had all the advantages that the antebellum South did in creating a cohesive culture. Ample farmland, vast amounts of cheap home ownership, and you in addition had just a lot of opportunity to grow economically. And there was it seems to me low population density was also a factor here. All of those things make it very easy for British common law culture to take root, and people just stop caring about whether they're from Switzerland or Scandinavia or Germany or France. They just start acting like Albertans. So when I look at the old culture of Alberta, then I look at what Alberta is trying to be today, even with its massive influx of interprovincial immigration and in its major cities, external immigration, in spite of all of that, looks to me like the native Canadians that are living in Alberta, that are trying to be Albertan, and the native Albertans all distinctly represent British culture better than the government of Ottawa does, better than Ontario, and better than Quebec that LARPs as the true Canada, right? So I see an ethnic similarity here. I see a cultural and custom similarity. I see deep economic aligned interests. And, I would just extend this in spite of, the different kind of migration that happened after Alberta, the line was firmly decided and Alberta was made in Saskatchewan and British Columbia and blah, blah, blah. I will say that they probably have a very similar affinity to my culture as the people that live in the Plain States do. And people in Montana, I'm going to have a lot more in common with a person living in Montana than I am someone living in Wisconsin, Michigan, New York. And it's not merely, and again, people are going to bring up the fact, oh, well, there's a bunch of German immigration into the Plain States. You're not German. Why would you think you have a similar culture to them? Because the bedrock was the same, because there was low population density, because they had all of the same characteristics that allowed the British common law to root itself and dominate everything. Because that's what British common law does well. It does well with decentralized systems, which is why the more you try to centralize a British common law system, the worse it gets. Just take a look at the United Kingdom. Take a look at what Washington, D.C. is trying to do. The more you try to centralize it, the worse you make it. If you want to be a centralized system, you need to adopt a different system in its entirety. I don't want to do that because I'm an American, and I want you to fuck off if you do. I tried not to swear. Anyways, always gets me pissed off when we talk about this. But yeah. So, regardless of whether or not this project succeeds, I find it deeply interesting as an American, because out of everybody that lives in Canada, these people in West Canada seem to have the greatest affinity with my culture. And the people in Alberta, people in Eastern British Columbia, not Vancouver, the people in Saskatchewan, I see a lot of people in this area that have a lot in common with the people that I grew up around. We don't have the exact same culture, but we probably share a lot of ethnic boundary similarities, and we share a very deeply similar history. They just have a bunch. I just live in kind of a flat place full of forests, and they live in a place with, beautiful hilltops and mountains and everything. I'm a little bit jealous of that. And I guess, like, if you want like a kind of simpler, dumbed down thing, like a kind of baby answer, if you like want to like look at my mind like I'm a toddler, I love the idea of Alberta, absent many some of its newer immigrants. I like British Agartha. I love the pictures I see, and when I think about it, I just really, really want to have a relationship with these people. I think it makes sense on every single front. It makes sense in terms of international relations, in terms of domestic economy. It makes sense in terms of shared history, of culture, ethnos, everything. I have way more in common with these people than most of the other people um, north of the Canadian border. And I'm not saying that I dislike you guys from Quebec or Ontario, but you do have to admit that the current leader of the Quebec party wants to continue abusing Alberta. Mark Carney, most certainly, he deeply believes in all of the green policy that further marginalizes and damages Alberta. Now, I think he's way more Machiavellian than he may be letting off, so maybe Mark Carney does capitulate. All I want is a better outcome for these people. And I think that better outcome inherently means being able to do economic business with the United States in some way that Ottawa can't interfere with. If that ends up being Danielle Smith's vision of a sovereign Alberta inside of a united Canada, I'll be the most jealous man on planet Earth, because that's true federalism. That's what we wanted to do with the United States, and we failed to do. So I'm just going to look at them. It's like, wow, that's a successful version of what we tried to do. Why would I not respect that? Why would I not admire that? And if it turns into a type of thing where, these people need 29,000 more signatures or registers before they can collect signatures, they managed to do that. And they managed to do a referendum next year. And a majority of Albertans say, yeah, let's go. Let's get out of here. And I'm going to look at that and I'm going to go, that's awesome. I would consider, if I had a different wife, I would consider moving up there. But we'll probably visit on vacation. But no, it's just a beautiful thing to me from every standpoint. And I think people who fail to understand that probably don't understand me, which is the point of making this video. I hope you understand me a little bit better. And I hope you do support this. Even if you want Alberta to remain in Canada, you should support this, because it gives Alberta the leverage they need to fight for fairness within their federal system. So, God bless the Albertans trying to fight for their autonomy. And God bless anybody who chooses to support them. I hope we can all move towards a better and healthier system for this continent. I think that's all my thoughts. God bless you guys. Pray for my illness to end quickly. And otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.